Good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Tatara. I'm the Director of Film, Culture, and Community here at Japan Society. I want to thank you all for joining us for tonight. Tonight's event is a special celebration of At the Limits of the Gaze, the first English language collection of Takuma Nakahira's writings on photography. While Nakahira is no longer with us, his photographs and his writings are. He was an artist and a philosopher. His mind raced between photography, art, film, journalism, literature, politics, and more. We're honored to share this evening with you. And if you enjoy tonight, I encourage you to come back. Tomorrow night is an Ozu double feature. We're presenting the documentary The Ozu Diaries, followed by Ozu's Late Autumn on 35mm. Then on March 19th, we're presenting author Taro Tetsuya, the award-winning author of Spent Bullets. If you enjoyed tonight, I also encourage you to become a member. Members help us in our mission of bringing the US and Japan closer together. They receive first access, exclusive access, or discount tickets to events throughout the year, including a members-only World Baseball Classic Championship Watch Party on March 17th. Now, to begin tonight, I have the honor of welcoming the editor-in-chief of Aperture. Tonight is only possible because of him and the entire Aperture team. So please, a round of applause for Michael Famigetti.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to Japan Society for hosting this event celebrating the legacy of Takuma Nakahira, and thank you all for being here. I'm the editor-in-chief of Aperture, and for those of you who might not know, Aperture is a not-for-profit publisher that has been leading conversations around photography since 1952. So we publish a magazine, we publish books, we produce exhibitions, we host public talks. We are so proud to have recently published At the Limits of the Gaze, the first English language collection of Takuma Nakahira's influential writings on photography. A crucial figure in the history of Japanese photography, Nakahira was a founding member of Provoke, the experimental magazine of photographs, essays, and poetry, first published in 1968. And he's well known for his influential photobook, For a Language to Come. But in addition to being a photographer, Nakahira was also a prolific writer. He wrote on art and photography, as well as film, journalism, literature, jazz, politics, television, and much more. Through his essays, Nakahira relentlessly interrogates photography's relationship to power, the connection between language and images, and the gaze. To start with a few words from editors and translators Daniel Abbe and Franz Prichard themselves, Nakahira's essays, quote, both suggest doubt about and possibilities for a photographically mediated reckoning with the world. Tonight, we are thrilled to have Daniel Abbe and Franz Prichard, the book's editors and translators, here with us to speak on Nakahira's legacy, alongside scholars and experts, Maggie Mustard and Miwa Susuda. In addition, I'd like to acknowledge that the presentation materials you're seeing tonight were compiled by Yoko Sawada and provided by the estate of Takuma Nakahira, and through the generosity of Jen Nakahira. I also want to acknowledge the work of Noah Lin, who was actually the in-house editor on this project. Noah is based in Los Angeles, that's why he's not here tonight, but Noah did so much to shepherd this book through the editorial process. And I also want to acknowledge Leslie Martin, who was part of the early conversations about this project at Aperture. Leslie is now the executive director of Printed Matter. But just a few notes on our speakers. Daniel Abbe is an adjunct assistant professor at Temple University, Japan campus, Kyoto. He also lectures at Osaka University of the Arts and holds a PhD from the Department of Art History at UCLA, where his dissertation analyzed Nakahira's photographs and essays. Maggie Mustard is assistant curator of photography in the Miriam and Ira D. Wallach Division of Art, Prints, and Photographs at the New York Public Library. She is an educator, curator, and art historian focused on the history of photography. Franz Prichard is Associate Professor of Japanese Studies at Florida State University. His interdisciplinary research and teaching explored the literature, environmental thought, and visual media of contemporary Japan. He's also written beautifully about Nakahira's work for Aperture magazine. I think that was about a decade ago, so we've come full circle. And then Miwa Susuda is manager and photobook consultant at Dashwood Books, as well as the award-winning publisher of Session Press. Her writing on photography has appeared in IMA magazine and Aperture's photobook review, and Miwa's Instagram is a must follow for everyone. I also want to note that we have copies of the book At the Limits of the Gaze available for sale at a special price here, along with a few other Aperture titles. And I also just want to mention that Dan and Franz will also be hosting a talk about this book on Saturday, March 7th at Artist Space downtown. Thanks so much.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks so much, Michael, for that introduction. I'm Daniel Abbe. I'm one of the co-editors and co-translators of this volume. It's super exciting to have a full house here and so many people coming out to talk about Nakahira's work. Really looking forward to talking with everybody on this panel and also having questions with you. Thanks to everybody at Japan Society for hosting this event. Above all, thanks to everybody at Aperture for helping to get this book out into the world. We're super excited that we've actually published a volume of essays translated into English of Nakahira's writings, and I hope that some of this excitement for Nakahira's work will come out in our presentation today. If you could go to the next slide, thank you. So I am not going to go too much into Nakahira's own biography. Michael introduced quite a lot of that. I'll just say that if you come to this talk having already known Nakahira, I think it's likely that you will know his name because of the photographs that he would have taken here on the left side of the screen, which he published in a very short-lived journal of poetry and photography called Provoke. This was published in Tokyo between 1968 and 1969. And there's a sense in which these black and white photographs of Nakahira are really his quite iconic work. As you can see from the slide on the right, by the time we get to the mid-2000s, Nakahira's work has completely shifted. And after we just have one more slide to show you, and then we'll start having our conversation. As we talk, you'll see a loop of 5 different bodies of works from Nakahira's career, starting with his work from the late 1960s up to 1970, which was published in the photobook For a Language to Come, and then moving through the mid-1970s, a mix of black and white and color work, and then a quite lengthy slideshow, which will show all of the pages of his photo book called Documentary from 2011, which is his late color photography. So I think, if nothing else, this comparison of images will give you a sense of kind of what we're trying to do in this talk today, which is to expand your own idea of who Nakahira is, what his practice is like, and of course then to, we'll speak about his ideas in particular. It's quite hard to summarize the range of interests and questions that Nakahira raises in his work, but I can say that even in the first 2 or 3 pages of the collection that we've published, he already dispenses with Provoke. He criticizes it, says that it failed, and then moves right into other kinds of questions. So if you come to this talk thinking that we're going to speak about Provoke the whole time, that's certainly not the case. Nakahira was already sort of over it by 1970. And our collection of essays spans 1970 to 1977 and includes 11 different essays that Nakahira published during this time. If you could go to the next slide. I'll read the quote and then give a little thing and then give it to you, Franz, to riff on this. So if this is one of the quotes from our book, from one of Nakahira's most well-known essays called Why an Illustrated Botanical Guide. And I guess, Franz, can you read the quote? Yeah. I can't see it super well. Yeah.
We gaze at things and charge at them in order to possess them, but things offer nothing at all in response. precisely from this point, the point where the gaze of the self is repelled, it can be said that things start to cast their gaze back toward the self. A sight tinged with magnetic energy where the gaze of the self is woven together with the gaze of things. That is the world.
I guess it's sort of maybe surprising to see that we've published a volume of essays written by a photographer, and that there's no mention of photography proper in this quote. But I think it speaks to the really wide range of interests and questions that Nakahira is provoking in these essays. And hopefully, as we speak about them tonight, you'll get a sense of the range of things that he's thinking about. But I guess I want to stress that he's thinking about photography, but also constantly going beyond it. In the same way, he's writing from the position of a photographer living in Japan during the 1960s and 70s, but he's also thinking very much beyond the frame of Japan itself. So I hope that more of these broader questions will come out in our conversation. Franz, I'll give it to you for any kind of comment.
I just want to second Dan's gratitude in making this sort of collection possible. Part of this is entirely selfish because he and I have been talking about these ideas alone, basically, for over close to a decade. And now today, together with you, we're going to start a conversation and move our understanding of Nakahira beyond pretty much what everybody already knows about Nakahira, right? He was involved in Provoke and made really blurry and grainy images. But like this quote suggests, what's really at stake in a lot of these essays and a lot of the ideas that Nakahira is investigating is a different understanding of who the human is and our relationship with each other and our relationship with the world itself, right? So this is a question that, of course, is passing through the specificity of his practice as a photographer, as we'll look at some of the imagery, but more broadly, just the very question of how we know and how we exist in the world. And these fundamental questions are really what resonate today and what makes this a text for the present moment as well. So thank you for joining our conversation. Maybe we'll just jump right in.
Us. Yeah. Thank you, Dan and Franz. Thank you, Miwa. Thank you, Japan Society. Thank you, Aperture. We're really delighted to be here. Dan and I have not seen each other for almost 10 years. So this is really exciting for us. I hope it's exciting for you too.
Yes,
yeah,
it is.
It is for me. So maybe I'll just start off with a question on like sort of the more practical side of things, because I think, we were talking before about how that kind of opens up onto some other bigger questions, which is Nakahira was not shy of writing, and he wrote a lot, correct? Yes. So I imagine that one of the largest challenges at the outset of this project was, in fact, thinking about what are we going to translate and how are we going to whittle it down? So could you both talk about a little bit about the selection process and then how the sort of final form of this speaks to what you were hoping to achieve with the volume?
Yeah, to go back to like the origin point, right? In 2009, I was in Japan doing fieldwork for my PhD dissertation, working very closely, reading and learning from the Japanese collection of Nakahira's essays from 2006, I believe, and which was not even a complete collection of his writings. And looking very closely at that, I reached out to the publisher, where Yoko Sawada, the publisher of Nakahira's republications, like For a Language to Come and many others, circulation, was very generous in suggesting that, what would be really important, for you to do, Franz, would be to translate these into English at some point. And over the years, working in partial translations for the Language to Come reissue and circulation, I learned a lot about the work of translation as a way into his thinking and the way he's kind of connecting his photography and his questioning of power in some ways. And so when it came to this moment, through a number of meetings with Leslie and Michael in New York before the pandemic times, and trying to like imagine what are the things that you guys are all going to need to know about Nakahira's writings to really start this conversation about, what is at stake in Nakahira's work is this much bigger thing. And so we had a much longer list than what is in this version. And primarily it was like, let's get out of the more than 100 essays that he wrote between 1965 and 1975, or 1977, let's just get the greatest hits. And that was actually started a process of draft translations and working with others to get that going. And there's at least 5 or 6 more draft translations that aren't in here. And so what you get is not only the greatest hits, this is like the greatest of the greatest. So that's a process of refinement, right? Really bringing it down to not just there's some stuff in here that really gets you into the weeds for sure, into his thinking. But there's some other things in here that really give you a sense of a flavor of just the capacious nature of his thinking. It's not just photography. It's not just Japan. There's a lot more in here. This is a kind of comprehensive introduction to all of the different facets and threads that really define his work.
Yeah, I can say just looking across the table of contents that there's essays that deal very specifically with film. There's an essay about jazz. So in one part, we definitely wanted to give a sense of the range of Nakahira's interests while also getting to these very important essays that are really, really well known in Japan. Like the essay that we quoted from at the beginning is one that is really his kind of trademark essay. So if people know anything that Nakahira has written, it's going to be that essay, which is kind of surprising because it's this very philosophical, complicated essay that's trying to grapple with photography in this very strange way. So hitting those really landmark essays, but also giving a sense of his overall practice, I can say, is some of the guiding concerns for picking the essays.
And was there, how do I phrase this? Was there also a sense of like, in terms of there's diversity of subject matter or like quote unquote sort of, he's writing on jazz or he's writing on film, but also these essays initially appeared in lots of, is that right? Like lots of different venues. Was there also a kind of mindfulness about, we want to have a sense, even if it's a little bit more of a subtext, about the diversity of the ways in which these ideas are coming out into the world? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's two essays maybe appeared in the same publication, the literary newspaper, but otherwise, it's a huge range. There's essays that were published in photography magazines, in art journals of the time. He was writing in design magazines as well. So I think that was another factor in addition to writing, the jazz magazine is the jazz essays published in a jazz magazine. So definitely, as you say, it's a kind of subtext. If you read at the end of each essay, it will say where it's published. And so if you piece that together, then you can get some sense of the range of his activity. So not just the content of what he's talking about, but the publication history of just to show how broadly he's working, certainly.
Do you feel like that changes how he's writing as these translators? Like, is he aware of the sort of venue in which the essays are going to appear? Like, do you see that in the writing?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Sometimes he'll be like, the editors told me to write about this, and I took 3 pages to talk about something else, and now I have to get back to what they actually wanted me to write. And
that's something unique to, one of the things we, both as scholars and educators and people that, like to celebrate this work in our own teaching and writing. One of the things that's challenging is to position this as a thinker. Nakahira isn't comprehensive. He's not systematic. He's not got an argument for everything that follows a single logic. In fact, as we were talking about earlier, these publications very much shape what he's going to say, right? He's very much thinking about each moment of writing as a performance in that space and with that audience in mind and in dialogue with other folks in those spaces. So, we translate it all together, but really what's lost a little bit is that sense of the vast ecosystem of conversations and the print culture and the beautiful kinds of support networks that are part of this writing, which are kind of in the act of translation, effaced and abstracted, but essentially, yes, that he would not have written many of these things without the actual presence of these outlets that were very supportive and enabling of this kind of ongoing sort of exploration and interrogation, right? It's a quite different approach to writing, I think.
Yeah, no, it is.
Mm-hmm. I just wonder, is there any American person, photographer that did similar things like Nakahira?
Yeah, I mean, I think the closest figure for that would be Alan Sekula, somebody who is both a practitioner of photography, writing very critical essays, and I think Sekula is a good comparison because of a sort of shared political sense, writing at the same time, thinking a lot about the U.S. war in Vietnam, that being the kind of structuring condition for making photographs and for thinking about contemporary art. I think it's in the sort of overall photo essay realm. Like we talk a lot about Susan Sontag or Roland Barthes, Walter Benjamin. I feel like Nakahira is somebody that can also be in dialogue with these people, somebody that is speaking to the medium in that broad of a range. But Sontag, Barthes, Benjamin, they themselves were not photographers. So yeah, the closest example for somebody like that would certainly, I think, be Alan Sekula. Yeah.
And that's, I think you bring up a really important quality of Nakahira within a larger ecology of critical writing on images from this time period, is that in some ways, first and foremost, he's coming from the position of somebody who makes images. And we were also talking about this a little bit earlier, that he's not afraid of positioning himself, right? Like in these larger questions about what an image means in the world, what its relationship is to power, what the relationship is to capital. And some of the other thinkers of this time period are kind of scared of that, right? Like it's kind of taboo to have a subjectivity, right?
Yeah. And part of this has to do with we didn't touch on this either, but like part of the political context where, in fact, the personal is political was very much the starting point of the radical left movement at this time. So everyone's positionality really had to be foregrounded as the site of struggle, the site of questioning. And we see that in Nakahira's writings again and again. He writes in his most kind of abstract general level, in a critique of mass media, but it always comes back to his practice. What does this mean for me as a photographer to produce images in the context of this new modality of power which circulates through mass media? It's a question that he personally is facing, and thereby it's situated in his own, it's in his own practice. And he's not trying to restore his authenticity, his sort of integrity of his identity, right? What he's in fact interrogating is his own complicity in power.
Yeah. I think that's when I was reading through it again this week, this was something that maybe I didn't pick up the first time because I was sort of grappling maybe with the ideas more the first time through, but this week, certainly I felt it, that there's this sense of a kind of restlessness in his writing, and in some ways it's really good. Like it's not that there's no confidence in it, but there's this act of continually questioning and pushing himself. And also I think especially the last essay, which we can talk about later maybe as a coda, but it's so emotional, right? Do you get the similar sense from him that there's this sort of questing, right? Yes. Rather than trying to fit things into specific boxes and certain shapes and sizes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sense in which it's very existential. He's always questioning himself. This comes back also to his own questioning of Provoke itself.
Yeah.
I said at the beginning that, okay, in the first few pages, he criticizes Provoke. He goes back to it again in a much more harsh way, midway through the collection that we have. So this idea of putting himself under the microscope is something that I think runs throughout quite a lot of the text that we have here.
What is his criticism of Provoke? How would you describe it? And why do you think it happens?
He basically says that he had no sense of photography as a mass media object. The essay in which he's criticizing Provoke the most strongly, this is called The Illusion Called Document, one of the other kind of landmark essays, I would say, in the collection. And he's writing a lot about television in this essay. Mm-hmm. So he's thinking quite deeply, I think, about the situation of what he calls technical images, basically something produced with a lens. So that includes photography, it includes cinema, it includes TV, and just considering the network of power in which images are created. Mm-hmm. But then he goes, this relates to what you're asking about in terms of his restlessness mm-hmm. or questing, is that this all kind of comes back to the sensory level for him. So I feel like when he's writing about media, even though this is in 1972, we're getting his own sensory embodied experience of what it's like to interact with digital media well before. I mean, he's not writing about anything that we can, recognize today, or he's not writing about Instagram, obviously, but we're getting these embodied recollections of how it feels for somebody who's living on this cusp of the transition between a very analog image space to a more digital image space.
Yeah, and that's one of the more pervasive takeaways from his writings too, is that while he's confronting things immediate to his historical moment, because the underlying structures of his society are largely similar to, or if not more intensified in the present, these questions only get stronger in how they kind of interrogate our own sort of relationship to image media.
Sorry, you go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you.
I wanted to ask Miwa a question.
Yes. Go.
Yeah, because you're so connected to Japanese photography outside of Japan. I think that you're in a position where you can really understand very well what people's interest in Japanese photography is. So I wonder, in the first place, if you can speak to how you see the way that Japanese photography tends to be received outside of Japan, and then also if there's anything in this book that you think might shift that, or how that would fit into the image of Japanese photography so far. I'm very curious to know.
Sure. I have to say Japanese photography is still such a minor subject in the US. When I had a chance to talk to a Rochester, workshop, this place is very famous. And then I expect that many people know about Araki and the Daido Moriyama, but they didn't know that. And then New York is New York City is a very intellectual city. However, my client Dashwood only know about very few names. Of course, now they know Hiromix and then Takashi Honma. I don't think they know deep enough about Japanese photography. Martin Pearl and then Andrew Ross wrote the book, like a, book on a book, but it was from like a Western perspective. So I really hope that your book gonna give like a more direct impact to the reader, because it's like his voice. Yeah. So it will be very interesting. Yeah.
When did you first learn, Miwa, about Nakahira? Do you remember?
Oh, I joined Dashwood 2005, so it's been more than 20 years. But my boss loved Japanese photography, and then he brought many books from Japan. So Nakahira was one of them, so 20 years ago. And many people at the Dashwood always compare Daido and the Nakahira. Yeah. They quickly noticed that Daido kind of celebrate the consumer society, more like things and the material and the graphic. Nakahira is poetic, and he make like a horizon line more tilted and then grainier. So they notice quickly that how different they are. And then Nakahira is our favorite photographer. That's for sure.
You recently posted on Instagram about this work, Hanran, and I really liked what you had to say about that. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I was surprised to read that was one of your favorite Nakahira works, because it's one of the lesser known materials. Many of you are probably seeing this for the first time, his color work that's much different than what you're probably familiar with, if you're familiar with it at all. But you wrote a little bit about what you find so interesting about Overflow.
Well, people still like a black and white picture from a Japanese photographer. So when Nakahira made a color work, we didn't make a much sale. So I think the photobook time and the circulation time was the best, most popular.
Do you have a particular reason for, like, what do you see in this Overflow work? Like, what appeals to you about it?
Well, I love the Overflow. However, we have a hard time to sell this book. so for the American audience, I still think that black and white photobook images are best.
Yeah.
easy to understand.
Yeah, I think it has a very, in its own way. I mean, it is connected. This is the moment of pop art also, and some of the photographs in Provoke were made with a Xerox machine, and everybody knows about Andy Warhol at this point. So it does have a very pop sensibility, even today. So I think it's very easy to grasp, for better or for worse. The work that will come up in a couple of minutes, Nakahira's late color work, that's miles away from the Provoke aesthetic, which it's very crisp, it's in color, so taken during the daytime, very, very different mode of photography. So I think there's other kind of possibilities even for understanding Nakahira's work. Maggie, I'm curious to ask, you're an expert of post-war Japanese photography. And, I just wonder sort of, as Franz kind of alluded to, we're sort of so far down the Nakahira rabbit hole that we don't have any perspective anymore. But I just wonder sort of how you see Nakahira fitting into Japanese post-war photography history. Let's say just sort of your take on him.
It was so refreshing to read this publication. I'm not being paid to say this, by the way. It was so refreshing to read this publication, partially because it reminded me how wrong I had been about Nakahira, in the sense that it has, I spent a lot of time with this material, but in my day job, I don't spend a lot of time just thinking about post-war Japanese photography. I've got a lot of other things I need to think about, as much as I would like to. And I think the way that I was thinking about his work in particular was very oversimplified, in the sense that I think happens to a lot of people in the way that his work is presented, or the way that it's sort of ingested, especially in a American, Western, or global audience, is he belongs to Provoke, and his aesthetic is arebore, and he's one of the really smart ones, and he writes a lot, like Takikoji or something, right? But so I will admit that because I had had a little bit of distance from his work and wasn't thinking about it as much, he had sort of fallen into that space that was oversimplified and maybe overdetermined. And the wonderful thing about reading this translation was, number one, it's really refreshing to read his work in English in a way that is so accessible, because I find his Japanese very dense, and it's hard work to get through it. And so, yes, there's a lot of really intense ideas in it, but it's really wonderful to have it in an accessible way. So that was really refreshing. The other part is it reminded me that I needed to go back and look closer at his actual photographs. And it reminded me that he is more than Provoke, obviously, and also that the way he's doing things, sort of like Miwa, you gestured at, there isn't a cohesive aesthetic that belongs to Provoke. And I think it gets subsumed under the bureboke a lot, but they are individual practitioners, they are individual artists, they are individual thinkers who for a very short period of time are linked together through this sort of manifesto act and this act of kind of collective publishing. But it dissolves fairly quickly, and then you can think of Provoke as a moment that's sort of generative. Actually, Nakahira has in the essay on surrealism, he talks about surrealism, like the historical surrealism in Europe in the early 20th century, as what does he call a convulsive spasm that sort of opens up to contemporary thought. And as I was reading that, I was like, oh, it's so smart to put this in this collection because he's talking about Provoke. Is he?
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was a question I had. So he's looking at this moment of historical surrealism, which gets, I think, similarly overdetermined, that like they're just trying to get at the unconscious. And he's saying, okay, let's unpack that. Let's think about what else they were doing here. And it's a wonderful meta narrative about, he's aware of the way that people are writing him into the narrative already of Provoke. So does that answer your question? No. I had been thinking about him a little bit too simply, is my answer. And it reminded me of how much I really love his work also. I have a personal preference for a grainy black and white image for sure. But what I really love about it is the poeticism, as you mentioned. I love his, this is a loaded word with Nakahira, but landscape. It's a mentality and a kind of approach to making images that is so different from the other Provoke or art photographers associated with Provoke. And so for me, I think it's going to be really wonderful to go back again and look also at some of this newer stuff, which I have not paid as much attention to, with the book in hand also. Sorry, that doesn't even really answer your question, but hopefully it opened up some other things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Maggie's a great, your confession here really is a good entry point, because up to now you all had an excuse about not knowing about Nakahira's other stuff, but now you got to engage in this and you don't have any other choice. You simply didn't know before, but now you do. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. There's also, I mean, this brings up for me also some, as I was going back and looking at some of his photo books and some of the actual sort of photography, and then also reading through this at the same time, I noticed a couple motifs, recurring themes, images, and I'm wondering if those popped out to you as you were, it may not have because you were so deep down the rabbit hole, but to me, there's a couple. One is the dusk, the dark. He brings this up a lot, and you see it in his photography, especially the earlier black and white. A lot of it is night shooting, but not always, right? Some of it's just pushing, right, contrast. The other one is the ocean and the sea, which comes up in his language in several of the essays, and then is there as an image kind of tangentially in the final essay, in Interlude, which takes place on a beach. And the ocean, I mean, and it's also, it's on the cover. So I don't know. I mean, maybe this is too, maybe this is too art history professor of a question, but do these images or themes, did you notice them? Are there other ones that you noticed? Do they feel like they mean anything to you?
Do you want me to go? Okay. Ocean is a really huge one. Yes, it's on the cover. When we click over to the next slideshow and we're looking through Nakahira's 1970 photo book, that ends with 4 or 5 images of the ocean. So it's a really large motif in his photographic work. I'm going to jump into a very technical kind of translatory thing, but if you read this volume, there are times that he talks about this idea of the other shore, which was an extremely difficult word to translate. It has sort of calling on a sort of Buddhist idea of a completely different world, basically. He speaks about, we have our shore and there's the other shore on the other side, and we have to keep these things separate. So this idea of the shore maybe as a kind of boundary is something that's very important to him. Certainly, literally the horizon and photographs of the ocean are motifs that crop up a lot in his work. And dusk is, of course, something else that shows up so much in the photographs that we're about to see here, this 1970 work. But then, quite famously, in the essay that I quoted at the beginning, he will claim that all photographs need to be taken in harsh, bright light and under sunlight. So it's something that he is both very attracted to, but then will try to push away. But both this last essay that Maggie is alluding to, this very, you're right, it's a kind of coda to the collection, a sort of hazy imagined encounter with someone on a beach. This both the ocean is there, it's written at dusk, so it is something that crops up quite a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I've found a lot of words to try to speak to these dynamics, because they are one of the through lines through a lot of his writing. And I mean, to put it in a more kind of esoteric philosophical register, which I think it operates at, right? There's a kind of a shifted ontology away from the human-centric one. Yeah. And the vocabulary that he uses is either fluidity, flux, water, or fire, right? And fire is a kind of energetic transformation from matter to energy. And at stake in that first quote about the entanglement of gazes, and throughout a lot of these writings, in this terminology of this shore and that shore, are questions of mediation, right? And from a media philosophy perspective, there's so much rich kind of rethinking of what mediation is and can be as a site of potential, as a site of condensation of power. And so these these terminologies which actually resonate with this imagery, right? Like whether it's dusk, whether it's the fluidity on the surfaces, there's a lot of attention to both the expulsive force. Maybe, you know, if you want to read these allegorically, is right, the police, right, police, like cleansing the politics out of the streets, which some people have. Nakahira does not think allegorically, so we're not. But obviously the shores, right, and this idea of that there is within the act of mediation, the act of photographic mediation with the world, with this entanglement of gazes and the holding together of many kinds of different gazes. Photography's potential lies in this ability to bring into relationships profound and irreconcilable differences. So photography, uniquely for Nakahira, is a site for thinking ontological difference, right? Which, you know, philosophy nerds will know. Like, this is a big deal in this time, right? We're trying to undermine the subject-object split. We're trying to move into different kinds of arrangements of knowing and being in the world. And for him, it's figured through these encounters with the landscape and different figurations of shores, horizons, water, fire, transformation.
Yeah, I just want to add one note to that, which isn't directly related to the idea of oceans and dusk, but more in terms of what Franz said about different gazes intertwining. The quote that we've picked for the back of this book also comes from the essay that we've been quoting from so far. And there Nakahira says, "To look is also to expose the self to the gaze of the other." So on the one hand, there's an idea, I spoke about the idea of this shore as a kind of boundary, but Nakahira is always very interested in the ways that boundaries are going to break down, or maybe go blurry, perhaps. So I think that, and this also maps onto his broader political ideas, and also getting to an idea of the photographer being somewhat vulnerable. So if people are reading Ariel Azilai, I think that the ideas that Nakahira is talking about will certainly resonate with what she's discussing. You know, she has the idea of unlearning the position of the photographer as an expert, and I think that what Nakahira is proposing is something very much in line with that goal. Should we do questions?
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah. Should we open it up? What's our time like?
Yeah, what time is it?
Yeah, it's 7:45.
Oh.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
15 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah. Do we have a microphone? Yes.
Yes. Okay,
Yeah.
great. We'll open it up.
Okay. Yeah. Peter, do we have a
I
question?
think we have a hand up here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to stand up?
No.
Just hang
Unless you
out.
want to.
Yeah.
I'm actually new to his photography, and I've been looking at it, and I see experimentation with texture and boundaries that you mentioned, and also status and objects. But I'm interested in what he writes about and thinks about in terms of light and photography as a medium or fraction of light. Mm-hmm. If you could elaborate. I'll read it later, but
Yeah.
the short version from you. Okay.
Yeah, the discourse of light is not often very technical in terms of he's not often talking about the way, the angle, but he does speak in this essay that we've been quoting from at the end. He puts forward this method of getting around all the problems that he's diagnosed with his harsh black and white photography from Provoke. And he says we need to photograph outside in bright daylight, and then also to use color film. The reason being that if you send your film to the lab, then you can get out of the dark room, and therefore you don't have to use your hand, and therefore there's no subjectivity in the photograph, which I think is I don't agree with that idea. I don't think it's possible to actually remove your subjectivity from but that's what he's talking about. And this idea of removing the subjectivity has to do with these bigger philosophical ideas. But the idea of light is that things need to be shown as they are. So I'll make another art historical reference, but Nakahira is in really close dialogue with the Monoha artist Li Ufan, and this idea of showing things as they are is his reason for saying that, we need to photograph in bright light, not photograph during the dusk. That's blurry. That's just trying not to see things. So that's where he's coming from with that idea. Yeah. many questions.
Actually, two questions. One, I believe, are your words that was in the little précis about the show, talking about the photography mediating the world, and I wondered what you meant by that. I mean, what was he mediating? What did he think that? And then the attached question is, did he view photography as an art or as a political statement or both?
Well, the real answer lies in this volume. But I'm drawing on my experiences and reflecting on this. So mediating the world, as I said, is quite simply what's at stake for photography for him, right? Photography is not necessarily an aesthetic tool for him. It's not an artistic practice. One of the things I learned, I don't know anything about photography. I came to this text from literature and film studies and so forth. And I learned everything from Nakahira. So I'm sure all photographers take photographs like this, right? But certainly what the world was for him was, something fundamental about how the human-centric epistemologies of modernity can be undermined from within, right? It's not so much about a new philosophy, a new argument about subjectivity. It's about finding ways to attenuate the human as it was constituted at that moment. And it puts him in concert with a number of post-structuralist and philosophical interrogations of the existing notion of the human, right? What Sylvia Wynter calls the mono-humanist genre of being, right? This monopoly of a way of being, which is in fact not universal at all, but quite particular. And so this question of what is it that is mediated in this understanding of photography, it's a new way of measuring and limiting that human-centric understanding, right? And surrendering, as the quote mentions, the power of the photographer, the power of the human-centric outlook. That epistemology is attenuated from within this fundamental technology, which usually is what's consolidating this epistemology of human as operator of the world, human as possessor of the world, right? So it's a way of sort of renegotiating the power differential that the camera is usually imposing.
And also power writ large on a kind of human scale that is both state power and capital power also, right? That, by the late 60s, there's a relative agreement among the left artists and thinkers and everything that images are a problem very largely, right? We need to figure out how do we deal with the fact that the state knows how to control imagery and capitalism knows how to control imagery, and they are feeding it to you, everyday people, in a way that you are not aware of and making you think things. And, so this is a sort of general agreement. So I didn't mean to jump on you because that was a beautiful explanation, but that's also an element of the mediation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bingo.
And that also explains, I think, your second question about art versus political statement, or I would say maybe art versus document, and that he certainly never wants to put himself forward as an art photographer, but it's just as Maggie says, the idea before he can even take photographs, he's basically constantly facing an existential crisis before he can click the shutter. So it's a matter of, before even getting to that level of he's always trying to justify how it's possible to be a photographer, because as this other essay, the one that Maggie is alluding to, references, there's a case in which a man attends a political demonstration in Okinawa, and sort of random snapshots of him are published on the front pages of a national newspaper, and he's arrested on charges of murder for this, even though he just happened to be there and just sort of randomly captured by these photographs. So he's thinking in a very, very concrete terms about these politicized conditions of photography, and so it's less about is it art or political statement. It's about all these questions that sort of come even before clicking the shutter and publishing the work. Yeah, so kind of both. Yeah, over here. Oh, can we wait for the microphone just to? Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know who he is or was, and my daughter said, "Let's go."
Welcome.
So I said, "Oh, okay, it's interesting." And from the beginning, I was looking at the backdrops you have. And I said at the beginning, I didn't like it. And I'm not the poet. I'm not the writer. I'm not intelligent. I say, but when I'm looking at this, and I asked him, his era, how old was he, compared to mine? And I really, first thing I think about this is like, when I was little, like 10 years old or something, my father was subscribing Time magazine, black and white, and I was in Japan. I had no idea what the language was written, but I was able to flip through the pages, and I really enjoyed it. Now I'm in America, and I see manhole in Manhattan. I said, I saw that when I was 10 years old. So when I'm seeing his work right now, I really feel that he's a foreign correspondent, or not exactly war correspondent, but I was seeing through after World War II, so I'm flipping through those pictures. I really start seeing, after you guys explaining things, after 20 minutes later, I said, oh, I can relate myself with my recollection of the Time magazine, and I didn't know English or anything, but I really feel he is expressing, or he sees it and leave the, conclusion on you, but he will say, I don't know if he intended to take certain picture for somebody to reach the same conclusion with him. I'm not sure, but I really feel I had to raise my hand. So say, I really connect myself with Time magazine pictures with his work. And he was already, he was born 1938, says. Yeah. So he was about 20 years later. Yeah. So he was a young man, and he was, looking through those Time magazine, maybe, like I did. And I think, I'm not sure because I didn't really read nothing I know about him, but when he was young, I think his brain was really, he met the American, whiff in Japan. I said, wow. That's what I felt, and thank you. I'm glad I was here.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Question in the back.
Hey, this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek question, but what do you think Nakahira would think of Instagram and the way that images disseminate in the modern age? This connects to his work of circulation and what he did for the Paris Biennale or something as well. Thank you so much for your talk.
We can all maybe have
I asked this question, or we were sort of joking also. We asked, it was, what would Nakahira think of Gen AI too? I'll let you guys tackle that first. You know his rating better than me, but it's.
I'll try to keep it quick. So, honestly, one of the things I've learned about photography from Nakahira was that, because the underlying conditions of capital haven't changed, in fact, they've gotten worse, right? The same kinds of concerns that he had at that time about the mass production of images, the circulation of images, the consolidation of power are only much worse, right? And the fact that we don't talk about it in the same way that Nakahira did, perhaps, is one of the problems we're facing. So the answer to your question.
I think circulation is definitely this. Is this what's on this?
Is this circulation? No, not yet.
No, it'll come back around. But even from the title, circulation, you can tell that he's thinking about media and distribution of images. I think the big shift with Instagram is that then individuals are able to broadcast in a very wide way. So I can't, I'm sure he would have a extremely critical and quite, somewhat cynical take on Instagram, but I imagine that he would be interested in, let's say, the mode of subjectivity on Instagram, or that he would probably be quite interested in not so much the position of the receiver, which is what he's thinking about in the 1970s, but something about the position of being a producer. So I think that would be the structural, maybe his angle on that, and probably say something sort of existential about where that leaves us. Yeah.
We have time for one more? Yeah, I think so.
Oh,
we've got one there.
Yeah.
Hi. I was just curious about what the relationship to like modern contemporary photographers in Japan to his work. Is there any like discussions going on, or I don't know, in Osaka or Kyoto or Tokyo, or like groups that discuss this, or works that you connect to? Yeah, today.
I think I would say that he's very well known in Japan, certainly, and that if you're in a photography program, certainly, maybe to some degree, contemporary art university setting, then he will definitely be part of the lecture, the essay that we keep on talking about. That's, as I said, a kind of landmark essay, so people really know that. I can't say that there are any Nakahira study groups currently happening, and I live in
There will be soon, though, right? Yeah.
I mean, I live in Kyoto, so I can really speak a bit more to Kansai, so Osaka and Kyoto. If there are Nakahira study groups, I'd love to know about them. But I don't know. I'm not sure that his ideas are being discussed so directly or with a lot of intensity right now. You know, his collected collected essays were published in 2009, maybe? 2006, yeah. So they're definitely in the water, so to speak, but I can't say there's any great community of Nakahirans out there who are, you know, yeah, like that. Yeah.
But that is one of our great hopes, that this conversation that starts here today with you will kind of percolate throughout the world, and we'll all have our Nakahira study groups, and you'll be running them. So, thank you.
You have the retrospective.
In 2024.
Yes.
Yes, at the Tokyo MoMA, yes.
Yeah.
So that was
a big show.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, there was
the texts weren't there.
I think that's a wonderful moment to end on. Any final thoughts for the audience tonight?
I have a really quick question for Dan and Franz. Favorite essay in the collection?
Illusion Called Document.
Not in the collection.
I thought.
I don't know. It's really, really special to have people who are interested in learning about Nakahira here, and yeah, I like this idea of the globalized Nakahira study groups. So yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you all. This is wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for coming. A massive thank you to everyone from Aperture, for all of our panelists. Please join us in the lobby for a book sale and book signing. Thank you all.
Thank you.